In just 29 seconds, what started as friendly banter on Graham Norton's couch turned into an absolute meltdown that left the entire studio in shock. A simple question about royal life spiraled into a screaming match that ended with Meghan Markle storming off the set in fury, leaving Graham Norton speechless and the audience stunned into silence. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure you subscribe to this channel for daily videos exposing the royal family's darkest scandals. Hit that subscribe button now, because you won't want to miss what we uncover next. Last night on Graham Norton's show, things took a turn that nobody saw coming. Meghan Markle was sitting on that famous red couch, smiling and waving to the crowd as they cheered. She looked relaxed in her designer dress, crossing her legs and settling into the cushions like she owned the place. Graham, being the charming host he is, started with light questions about her latest projects and what she's been up to in California. Everything seemed perfectly normal at first. Meghan talked about her podcast, her children, and how much she loves living in America. She laughed at Graham's jokes and even made a few of her own. The audience was eating it up, clapping along and enjoying the show. But you could sense something underneath the surface, a tension that was just waiting to break through. Graham, known for being cheeky but never mean, started asking about her relationship with the royal family. It was a natural topic, something everyone wanted to know about. He kept it light at first, asking about whether she missed anything about living in the UK. Meghan's smile got a bit tighter, but she answered politely, saying she missed some friends but was happy with her choices. Then Graham asked about the kids and whether they would ever spend time in England. It was an innocent enough question, the kind any interviewer would ask. But Meghan's face changed. Her jaw clenched for just a second before she plastered that smile back on. She said something vague about keeping her children's privacy sacred and how she makes all decisions based on what's best for them. Graham nodded along, but then he made a comment that would set everything off. He mentioned, almost as a joke, that it seemed strange how she talks so much about privacy while also doing interviews and podcasts. He said it with a grin, trying to keep things playful, but you could see Meghan's eyes flash with anger. She sat up straighter on the couch and her voice got sharper. She told Graham that there's a difference between controlling your own narrative and being attacked by the press. She said she wasn't going to apologize for telling her own story after years of lies being spread about her. The audience got quiet, sensing the mood shift in the room. Graham, still trying to keep things light, laughed a little and said he wasn't attacking her, just pointing out what some people might see as ironic. He mentioned how she and Harry had done that big interview, released a documentary, wrote a book, and did countless podcasts, all while asking for privacy. His tone was still friendly, but the question was direct. Meghan didn't laugh. Instead, she leaned forward and said that Graham clearly didn't understand what it was like to be treated the way she was treated. Her voice was getting louder now, and she told him that every time she spoke up, people like him tried to make her look bad. She said she was tired of men telling her how she should behave or what she should do with her life. Graham's smile faded a bit. He tried to interrupt, saying that's not what he meant at all, but Meghan kept going. She was on a roll now, her hands moving as she talked, her voice filling the studio. She brought up every criticism she'd ever faced, talking about racism, sexism, and how the British public never gave her a fair chance. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay silent. Graham, looking a bit uncomfortable now, tried to steer things back. He said he respected her experiences but that his question wasn't meant to be hostile. He reminded her that he's always been supportive of her and Harry, and that he was just trying to have a conversation. But Meghan wasn't having it. She cut him off and asked if he would ask a man the same question. She said that women, especially women of color, always get criticized for speaking up while men get praised for the same thing. Graham tried to respond, saying that he asks tough questions to everyone regardless of gender, and that this wasn't about her being a woman or her race. That's when things really exploded. Meghan's voice went up another notch and she said that Graham was being dismissive of her experiences. She told him that he was part of the problem, sitting there in his comfortable position, questioning her choices when he had no idea what she'd been through. The audience was completely silent now, everyone watching this unfold in real time. Graham, who rarely loses his cool, started to push back. He said that being on his show was voluntary, and if she didn't want to answer questions, maybe she shouldn't have come on. He pointed out that she had a team of people who approved all the questions beforehand, so none of this should be a surprise. His Irish accent got a bit thicker as he spoke, a sign that he was getting frustrated too. Meghan looked stunned for a moment, like she couldn't believe Graham had just said that. Then her face turned red, and she said that just because she agreed to come on the show didn't mean she had to sit there and be insulted. Graham shot back that he hadn't insulted her once, and that she was being overly sensitive to a simple question. The words, overly sensitive, hung in the air like a bomb. Meghan's mouth dropped open and she stood up from the couch. She pointed at Graham and said that calling a woman overly sensitive was classic gaslighting behavior. She said she wasn't going to sit there and be told how to feel by someone who had never walked in her shoes. Graham stood up too now, and you could see he was genuinely upset. He's been doing his show for years and never had someone react like this. He told Meghan that she was putting words in his mouth and making this about things he never said. He raised his voice, which shocked everyone because Graham never raises his voice, and said that not everything is an attack. Meghan grabbed her purse from beside the couch and told Graham that this was exactly what she was talking about. She said that people always make her out to be the villain when all she's doing is standing up for herself. She said she was sick of it, sick of defending herself, and sick of people like him acting innocent while tearing her down. Graham threw his hands up in the air and said he wasn't tearing anyone down. He told her she was being ridiculous and that she needed to stop playing the victim every time someone asked her a legitimate question. The audience gasped at that. Some people started whispering to each other, not believing what they were witnessing. Meghan's eyes filled with tears, but they looked like angry tears, not sad ones. She told Graham that calling her ridiculous was completely out of line and that she deserved an apology. Graham shook his head and said he wasn't apologizing for asking questions on his own show. He said if anyone deserved an apology, it was him for being accused of things he didn't do. The two of them stood there, facing each other across the famous red couch, both visibly angry. Meghan said something under her breath that the microphones barely picked up, but it sounded like she called him an asshole. Graham definitely heard it because his eyes went wide and he said, "Excuse me?" really loudly. Meghan didn't repeat it, but she didn't back down either. She told him that she came on his show as a courtesy and this is how he treated her. She said she should have known better than to trust British media, even a talk show. Graham fired back that he wasn't the media, he was an entertainer, and that she was being completely unfair. The audience didn't know what to do. Some people were looking at their phones, probably texting their friends about what was happening. Others just sat there with their mouths open, watching this car crash unfold. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of this disaster. Meghan started walking toward the exit, her heels clicking loudly on the floor. Graham called after her, saying they weren't finished and that walking off was childish. Meghan spun around and shouted back that she was finished, even if he wasn't. She said she didn't have to stand there and take abuse from him or anyone else. Graham, now really angry, told her that answering one difficult question isn't abuse, and that she needed to grow up. He said that if she couldn't handle basic interview questions without melting down, maybe she should stop doing interviews altogether. His voice echoed through the studio, and you could tell he immediately regretted saying it. But it was too late. Meghan's face went from angry to absolutely furious. She marched back toward him, getting right up close, and told him he had no right to speak to her that way. She said he was a bully hiding behind jokes and charm, but that she could see right through him. Graham stepped back, looking genuinely taken aback by her aggression. She poked her finger in the air near his chest, not quite touching him but close enough to make the point. She told him that history would remember who was right and who was wrong in this situation. She said he just made the biggest mistake of his career by treating her this way. Graham laughed, but it was a nervous laugh, and said that she was being dramatic. That word, dramatic, was the final straw. Meghan let out a frustrated scream and told him to go to hell. She turned on her heel and stormed toward the exit again, this time not stopping when Graham called after her. He yelled that she was proving his point by acting like this, but she just kept walking. As she reached the door that led backstage, she turned around one last time. The entire audience was watching. The cameras were all pointed at her, and Graham was standing there looking both angry and confused. Meghan shouted across the studio that everyone watching should remember this moment, remember how she was treated. for simply standing up for herself. Graham shouted back that she was making a scene over nothing and that she should be embarrassed. Meghan yelled that the only person who should be embarrassed was him. Then she said something that made everyone gasp again. She told him that the royal family was right about one thing, that the British media would never change, and that included him. Graham's face went pale at that. He started to say something, but Meghan was already pushing through the door. A production assistant tried to stop her, probably to calm things down, but Meghan pushed past them too. You could hear her heels clicking down the hallway as she left, the sound getting quieter and quieter. The studio was dead silent. Graham stood there for a moment, not saying anything, just staring at the door Meghan had gone through. The audience didn't know if they should clap or boo or just sit there quietly. Eventually, someone in the back started clapping, but it was slow and awkward, and nobody else joined in. Graham ran his hand through his hair and turned to look at the cameras. He opened his mouth like he was going to explain what just happened, but then closed it again. He looked at his producers off camera, and you could see them making frantic gestures, probably telling him to go to commercial or end the show or something. Finally, Graham spoke. His voice was shaky, which was weird because he's usually so smooth and confident. He said that clearly things got heated, and that he never intended for the conversation to go that way. He said he was just trying to have an honest discussion, but that sometimes people have different ideas about what honesty looks like. Some people in the audience nodded. Others looked skeptical. Graham kept talking, saying that he respected Meghan's right to feel however she felt, but that he also stood by his questions. He said that, as an interviewer, his job was to ask things that the audience wanted to know, even if they were uncomfortable. But you could tell his heart wasn't in it. He kept glancing at that door, probably wondering if Meghan was going to come back out and start yelling again. The energy in the room was completely dead now. All the fun and excitement from earlier in the show completely gone. Graham looked at his notes, trying to figure out what to do next. He was supposed to have another guest coming on after Meghan, but that person was probably backstage, watching this whole mess unfold and reconsidering their life choices. Graham mumbled something about technical difficulties and needing to take a break. The audience could hear shouting from backstage now. It sounded like Meghan was arguing with someone, maybe her security or her assistant. Her voice carried through the studio, and while you couldn't make out exact words, you could tell she was still absolutely furious. Things were being said about respect and treatment, and how she would never come back to the UK after this. Graham heard it too and winced. He tried to make a joke, saying something about how he'd had guests storm off before, but never quite like that. A few people in the audience laughed, but it was forced and uncomfortable. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something that would be talked about for weeks, maybe months. The cameras finally cut away, and the applause sign lit up, telling the audience to clap. They did, but it was half-hearted and confused. Nobody really knew what they were clapping for. Was it for Graham standing his ground, for the entertainment value of the drama, or were they just clapping because the sign told them to? Backstage, you could still hear chaos. Someone was on the phone, probably Meghan's publicist doing damage control already. Another voice was trying to calm Meghan down, but she wasn't having it. She was still going off about how disrespectful the whole thing was, and how she wouldn't stand for being treated that way. Graham sat back down on the couch, looking exhausted. He took a sip of water from a glass that was sitting on his desk and shook his head. You could see him mouthing something to himself, probably replaying the argument in his head and wondering what he could have done differently. Or maybe he was thinking he didn't do anything wrong at all. The producers were scrambling to figure out how to continue the show. They had planned for Meghan to be there for at least another 20 minutes, and now they had a huge gap to fill. Graham looked off camera and shrugged, as if to say, "What do you want me to do?" Meanwhile, Meghan's voice got even louder backstage. She was demanding that someone call her car immediately, and that she was leaving right now. She said she wouldn't spend another second in this building, and that everyone associated with the show should be ashamed of themselves. Staff members were rushing around, trying to make it happen as fast as possible just to get her out of there. The audience could hear all of this happening, and they were starting to look uncomfortable. Some people were on their phones, already tweeting about what they'd just witnessed. Others were talking to the people sitting next to them, debating who was right and who was wrong in this situation. The studio that had been so fun and lively earlier now felt tense and awkward. Graham tried to collect himself. He straightened his jacket, fixed his hair, and took a deep breath. When the cameras came back on, he was supposed to introduce the next segment. But you could see in his eyes that he was still rattled. This wasn't some scripted drama for ratings. This was a real argument that got way out of hand, and now he had to somehow finish the show. The door to backstage slammed open one more time. Everyone turned to look, thinking maybe Meghan was coming back to continue the fight. But it was just a production assistant, looking frazzled and stressed. They walked over to Graham and whispered something in his ear. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Whatever they told him, it seemed to confirm that Meghan was really gone. She wasn't coming back. She had left the building entirely, probably already in her car speeding away from the studio. Graham took another deep breath and looked directly at the camera. The weight of what had just happened seemed to hit him all at once. This wasn't just another night on his show. This was going to be everywhere by morning. Every news outlet, every social media platform, every conversation would be about this confrontation. Some people would say he was too harsh. Others would say Meghan overreacted. Either way, there was no going back now. You could still hear movement backstage, people cleaning up and trying to restore some sense of normalcy. But nothing felt normal. The whole atmosphere had changed. The fun, relaxed vibe that Graham Norton's show was known for had been shattered in a matter of minutes. Graham glanced at that empty seat on the couch where Meghan had been sitting just moments ago. The cushion was still indented from where she'd been sitting, a physical reminder of the explosion that had just occurred. He looked back at the camera, opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. The audience waited in silence. Some people were still processing what they'd witnessed. Others were already forming their opinions, deciding whose side they were on. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of this aftermath. This strange moment where everyone was trying to figure out what came next. Backstage, the voices had finally quieted down. Meghan was gone, taking all her fury and frustration with her. The staff members who had been dealing with the chaos were probably breathing a sigh of relief, glad that the situation hadn't escalated even further. But the damage was done. Graham finally spoke again, his voice quieter now, more subdued. He said something about continuing with the show and bringing out the next guest, but everyone knew that nothing could top what had just happened. The rest of the evening would just be awkward attempts to pretend everything was fine when clearly it wasn't. The show's band started playing music, trying to lighten the mood and transition to the next segment, but the notes sounded hollow somehow, like they were playing at a funeral instead of a fun talk show. The audience clapped along mechanically, going through the motions because that's what you're supposed to do, not because anyone actually felt like celebrating. As the commercial break music played, and the cameras cut away one more time, Graham slumped back in his chair. You could see the exhaustion on his face, the shock of what had just transpired finally catching up to him. He'd hosted thousands of episodes of his show, interviewed countless celebrities, but nothing had ever gone quite like this. The empty chair next to him seemed to mock him, a reminder of how quickly things could fall apart. One minute you're having a pleasant conversation, the next you're in a screaming match that ends with your guests storming off the set. Graham stared at that chair for a long moment before looking away. Somewhere outside the studio, Meghan Markle was in her car, probably on the phone with her people, her side of the story already being crafted and prepared for release. Back in the studio, Graham Norton sat on his famous red couch, the audience still processing what they'd witnessed. Everyone wondering how a simple question about privacy had turned into one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history. The night that was supposed to be fun and entertaining had become something entirely different. And as the commercial break ended, and Graham had to somehow continue his show, one thing was clear: nobody in that studio would ever forget what had happened here tonight.